Let me guess, you've never heard of Snotmouth disease before. Well, in this video we're going to talk all about what it looks like, where it comes from, and how to treat it, so stay tuned. Hey guys, welcome back to Matt Keeps Fish, and today we're going to put a special focus on Snotmouth disease, which is the name that I've given it because I haven't seen it anywhere else either. So for those of you who haven't been following along with previous updates, here's the story. A few months ago I bought my first batch of dwarf neon rainbow fish, and then a few weeks after that I got a second and then a third batch. With all the batches combined, I had about 14 dwarf neon rainbow fish in the 29-gallon aquarium behind me. Before adding each batch to my display aquarium, I quarantined them for 1 month each and dosed them with levamisole. Levamisole is used to remove the worst of internal parasites, which I've dealt with in the past. During the month that each batch was in quarantine, I also monitored for any other signs of illness. But all 3 batches seemed to be doing well in quarantine, and so all were eventually added to the display tank. Now, one thing that was great about the last 2 batches is I actually got a bunch of these dwarf neon rainbow fish for free. This was because at the store the rainbow fish had been housed with these really aggressive clown rasboras, and it looked like the rasboras had ripped their fins and bruised their bodies a little bit, so they just wanted to get them out of the store. Thinking it was no big deal, I happily accepted the rainbow fish, put them in quarantine, and add a little bit of salt so that their wounds wouldn't get infected. Aquarium salt is one of the most basic things that I use in quarantine because they aid in the more simple processes that a fish's body goes through so that they can put their energy towards more complex things like fighting off infection. But as I said, no issues. Bruises didn't really seem to be going away, but they weren't opening up or anything, so I just put them in the main tank. That's when I started to notice the snot, which is why I'm calling this Snotmouth disease. At first I thought it was decomposing plant matter that just got stuck in their fins a little bit and stuck in their mouth, which would make sense because in this aquarium the only one who's taking out that plant matter is me. There's no snails or shrimp or anything. So I took some videos of it just to keep track of it, but I didn't really see an issue. That was until I started seeing that their feces were empty. They were clear or white with no contents in them. And then some of the fish started to lose swim bladder control, which is when I thought, okay, maybe this is a parasite. So I put the worst of the cases into quarantine and maintained close inspection. This is when I noticed the next symptom, really heavy breathing. Although the water was well oxygenated and clean, some of them seemed to be having gill issues. And I think that was when I put all the rainbow fish in quarantine. Now I really wanted to avoid this because the rainbow fish had just spawned and I really wanted to raise up those fry in quarantine, but the fry take about 6 months to get to their first inch in size, and I did not have that time. So the fry went into 29-gallon with hopes that they wouldn't be eaten, and unfortunately they were eaten. And all the adults went into quarantine so that I could try to finally figure out what was going on. Now, in case you missed it at the beginning of the video, there are going to be some more graphic images of what is happening to these fish as the disease progresses, so just be warned. Although many of the fish died overnight or at a time where I was unable to take them out and get a good look at them, there was one specimen that died around the time that I came back home from work and I was able to really see what was going on. As you can see, there's a lot of black in between the scales. Some of the fins are kind of a little bit tattered. The eyes, I actually noticed, get a lot darker after they've succumbed to this, and a little bit bloodshot as well. The snot in this Snotmouth disease isn't visible in this case, but you can see that the feces are very empty. Just a week from now, I noticed another symptom with this disease, and that was bloating. One of my female rainbow fish just continued to bloat and bloat and bloat until the stress of it killed her. And finally, the worst symptom that I'm still dealing with right now is Popeye disease. Really, really bad Popeye disease. Now, as it currently stands, I've gone from 14 rainbow fish to 4 in just under a month. What's interesting to note about this Snotmouth disease is that there are some symptoms that are universal for all those that have died, and there are some that are specific to the individual. For instance, not all have bloated, not all have had a swim bladder disease, and there's only been one that has had Popeye. In all cases except for the female with Popeye, they've died. But as for now, this individual female continues to live, and I'm treating it in a few ways that I'll talk about in a moment. The more universal symptoms of all these individuals before they die tend to be heavy breathing, discolored eyes, empty feces, and of course, snotmouth. As I continued trying to figure out what this issue was, one of the experiments that I conducted was, after doing a water change, I did a time lapse, which you're seeing right now, of one of the buckets to see if anything was emerging from the waste. This allowed me to see if there was any nematodes or any kind of tapeworms that were crawling in and out of the waste that the fish had produced. The reason I wanted to check for internal parasites is because last time I had them, they had caused similar damage. For instance, in the previous group of Bolivian rams that I had, these nematodes, these internal parasites, had actually eaten all that they could from the stomach and the intestines of the fish, and they had punctured through into the body cavity, which allowed them to destroy the swim bladder of the fish, preventing them from being able to rise in the water without the use of their fins. What I found in this experiment was inconclusive. There was a lot of microorganisms, but none of them looked worm-like in any way. And certainly none were the trademark red that Camellinus worms often come in after feeding on the internal fish. Another thing that I noticed was the waste was full. It wasn't empty in this case, and as I continued to observe the rainbow fish, the ones that were left weren't producing empty feces anymore. Even the ones that looked sick were not producing empty feces anymore. This may have been because I was feeding them a higher fiber spirulina only diet, but I wasn't sure. At this point, I have done 4 different types of treatment. The first being levamisole. Levamisole is meant to, as I said before, clear internal parasites. It paralyzes them, it pushes them out, and then you vacuum them up. Even though I had treated them for a month each beforehand, I treated them again for this, and lo and behold, it didn't fix anything. My continued use of aquarium salt did not seem to be working. For those with swim bladder issues, I used Epsom salt baths once or twice a week, and that didn't prevent any losses. And then I tried malachite green, which is supposed to be for external parasites. This is the same medication that stores buy in bulk to prevent mostly ick, and since my store was stocked with some, I brought some home to treat my fish with it. This is my second week using malachite green, and so far, no losses. As for the female with Popeye, I'm also treating her with malachite green, and I'm using Epsom salt baths to help pull some of that extra fluid from the eye to bring it back to normal. Now, while there may be other medications that specifically target this disease, this is the only one that I could recommend based on my experience. Now, to speak to the nature of this disease, it doesn't seem to spread quickly. I would guess that the rainbow fish who died from it already had it. Thus, it may be that those who already had it, those free rainbow fish with the bruising on their bodies, were the ones that died quickest because they were the ones that had been infected with it for the longest. There's always the possibility that these are coincidences. Maybe that fish just happened to have Popeye at the same time that those started having their bruising look and they're not related at all. But there's also so many other symptoms here at play that there's got to be some correlation between them. It could be that the only unique symptom is the snotmouth, which is why I haven't seen it before and you probably haven't either. Perhaps the bloating and the heavy breathing and the empty feces are all just stress responses to this disease and not actual symptoms of the disease. Perhaps more hardy fish like zebra danios or African cichlids wouldn't have these symptoms because the symptoms are actually just stress responses from more fragile fish. So we've talked about my experience with this disease, how it develops in the fish, we've talked about the symptoms, we've talked about how I'm trying to medicate it and what seems to be successful. Now let's talk about what we think it is. It's not tapeworms, and I can say that with almost 100% certainty because we haven't seen worms hang out of them. We've treated them for 6 weeks with levamisole. The feces haven't been consistently empty, which for a fish with parasites, they should have all the nutrients eaten out of their feces before they come out of them. And that said, the fish are still eating, which for a fish with parasites, they should have given up on eating a long time ago. I've pretty much written off fungal infection. I don't see anything fungal about this. It's not like there's nothing visibly fungusy. Usually the fungus eats up pieces of the fish. It'll pop up, you know, it's not invisible. And it's definitely not an external parasite in the typical sense of external parasites because like ick, you see the little white marks from them burrowing into the flesh. Water lice, you see the water lice on them. Anchorworms, you see the anchorworms on them. Like this is not a super visible disease except for the symptoms. It could be a bacterial disease because those can operate pretty much invisibly depending on the type of disease. But it could also be a more invisibly operating parasitic disease. But whatever it is, it's only showing itself in these symptoms and uniquely in the bruising look on the rainbow fish and the snotmouth. The snotmouth symptom I find particularly interesting though because what is this substance? The darkness on the sides of the fish could be burrowing, it could be a loss of pigmentation because of stress, it could be a lot of things. but I have no idea where to start with the snotmouth substance. Recently I bought a small group of ghost catfish, and they've been doing well in the 29 for a while now, but I did have them for 2 weeks in quarantine with the 5-gallon. The reason I did this was because I've noticed in the past, ghost catfish are really resistant to this kind of stuff. Although in many physical ways they're a fragile fish, in terms of infection, other than like ick and things like that, they're really hardy. That was until I noticed a little tuft of it on one of the barbels of my ghost catfish, and that was when I said, I'm done, like we're not having them in quarantine anymore. I netted up the ghost catfish, I plucked the little snotmouth thing off of the barbel, and then I put them all in the display tank. Looking at them now behind me, I don't see any more of the substance. I haven't seen it since I put them in there, so I don't think there's going to be any issues going forward, and if there was going to be issues with it, it should have happened a long time ago for the months that the rainbow fish were in there. One possibility I found was when I was looking up black spot disease, which was what I originally thought it was, and I mentioned in a previous update, but black spot disease is basically a bird defecates in the water, the crustaceans and the mollusks and whatever, they eat up the feces, and then the fish eats the mollusk or the crustacean or whatever, and they get infected with the parasite. And it basically, I think it's like parasites that drill into the body, except it's black spots that come out instead of white spots like ick. Upon further inspection, I don't think that's what it is, because those spots are really, really small. They're like ick spots. They're not giant bruises like I've been seeing. The closest thing I've seen before is on the Aquarium Co-op forum, actually, where somebody posted a picture that looks exactly like what my rainbow fish looked like, and the only response that they got was, it could be fish TB, add some salt, see what happens. This post was never updated, so I'm pretty sure what happened is the fish died and he just forgot about it. I'm leaning towards parasitic infection with the way that this disease is manifesting itself, but I'm wondering if we can have some kind of a forum going on in the comments to keep this topic alive. Because with the way fish keeping works, it's really easy for information to get lost and for it to just fade away, so let's try to keep it fresh in the comments. In the 20-gallon, you may remember me saying that I was going to start breeding my assassin snails in the 5-gallon. They are in the 5-gallon right now. I'm strictly feeding them live foods, live ram's horn snails, and they are still failing to breed for me, so I think I'm going to sell them off. If you got to the end of the last update, you saw a quick little change of the scape. I moved all the crypts around, so now the big crypts are covering the filter, and in their place I have a beautiful carpet of Sesquitertang. It just looks so nice. The moss is also staying trimmed back, so hopefully we have a nice tight wrapping of Java moss around the driftwood to make it look nice and aged. And then the other plants haven't changed too much. I have noticed that there's also some issues in that tank as far as disease go, but I haven't lost any fish to it. I've just noticed that in a couple of my Ember Tetras, their insides have started changing colors. Like I have one Ember Tetra that's doing a little bit of heavy breathing, and his insides have started turning dark, like kind of black, as if he's just been eating detritus. And then on the other hand, I have an Ember Tetra whose insides are starting to turn really red. It's kind of weird. It could be mainly because I'm feeding him red bug bite flake food, but I'm not sure. And then some of the young ones just haven't gotten other color yet, so they're still a little bit on the more brown side of orange. But all in all, they're doing okay. What's really doing well, as I say in every update, are the CPDs, Celestial Pearl Danios. They're amazing, they're active, breeding all the time, amazing fish, highly recommend them. The Anchor Catfish Care Guide has done amazingly. If you guys want to see that, it'll be right there. I'm really happy with the amount of attention that's on this tiny little fish. I hope way more of you start keeping him. And then the last fish in the tank, the honey grommy, he's doing great. He's constantly wanting to breed, so I'm still up in the air if I should have a female for him. I'm a little worried he's going to get too aggressive with her, but he is constantly making bubble nests, and his throat is always a shade of black, so he really wants to lay some eggs. Then we have the remaining assassin snail and his best buddy, the pond snail. At this point, I'm worried that the pond snail is going to eat the assassin snail. He's getting pretty big. And then we have the colony of cherry shrimp. They're definitely not thriving, but they are sticking around for the long haul. On to the 29-gallon aquarium. It is doing much better since the rainbow fish left. I have endlessly enjoyed watching my two rams spar and create territories. Their names are now Terry and Jerry. Terry is the more dominant one. He controls the beachfront, so he gets all the sifting he wants, while Jerry stays in the jungle. And what's really cool is they actually respect this boundary. Terry will never enter that inner jungle, and Jerry is only allowed out when it's not feeding time. In fact, it's pretty funny how they go from defending food rights and defending territory to all of a sudden they're just casually swimming together. Now, as I said, I have some more ghost catfish in there. They're still pretty small, but they're looking pretty good. It's definitely cool to see how much the old ones have grown in comparison, because they're probably like a third larger than the ones that just went in, and they're all enjoying not having to compete with rainbow fish anymore. On that note, if I can get the rainbow fish well enough to go back in the 29 gallon, I think I'm gonna sell them instead and go with something a little bit more peaceful. I thought about breeding them on purpose, but I don't think I can commit to something like that right now. Instead, we're going to pair my Bolivian rams and my ghost catfish with a smallish school of pencilfish. This will allow the aquarium to maintain a calmer aesthetic without any of the fish being outcompeted by another. I'm not really making as much money off this aquarium anymore because the water sprite has slowed its growth down a lot, and I think that's because under the surface the jungle val has taken over most of the root space, which makes sense because it is over 4 feet tall now. What's cool is that the jungle val leaves are so thick and some of it's so close to the light is that I have a layer of algae growing on top of it, and there's detritus worms that have started a colony in the algae. Now this is cool because algae is a great natural food source for things like the goby that I have, and the detritus worms are a great natural food source for the other fish. There was a point that I thought the algae was getting a little too out of control, so I bought some mono shrimp, and then I found out that Amano shrimp and Bolivian rams don't do so well together. So now I'm thinking about adding some more Stiphodon gobies at the same time as the pencilfish, because the blue neon Stiphodon goby that I have in there is doing pretty well and he loves the algae. Last but not least is Junior's gecko enclosure. In the last update we made a lot of changes, such as adding the live philodendron plant, and since that last update the philodendron has grown quite a lot, just like all the plants that I use aquarium water for. And we've also added the dwarf white isopods that we've been culturing. So in short, this terrarium's been pretty awesome. Except for one tiny detail, and that is the male crickets that I've been putting in there. And one night they would not stop singing. I was up for the next 2 hours tearing the terrarium apart, and finally I find this cricket. But what else did I find? The powder orange isopods. In the last update I said Junior must have eaten them, but apparently they're thriving. This gives me a lot of hope for the future generations of the isopods and the springtails that are going to be living alongside my crested gecko. Now in the last update I had called this my temporary terrarium. I was thinking that by the time I got to this update I would have been telling you guys all about how I had rehomed Junior and I was closing down the terrarium and I was putting a tiny tank here or something. Instead I have a big update for you guys because we are moving and Junior is going to get a much bigger enclosure. That's right, I had promised you guys that before I did any more aquarium work the priority was going to be on upgrading Junior's home, and that's what we're going to do in the new place. So we're hoping to find a terrarium that's maybe 3 feet tall or maybe extra long instead and 2 feet tall, and then we're going to make it Jurassic Park themed with like a bunch of dinosaur bones and stuff. For those of you who are still here at the end of the video, I have a couple other life updates. The first is that I got accepted to my master's degree, so I'm going to be taking my master's in counseling psychology. I'm super excited for that. We're going to talk about later in the summer what that means for our YouTube videos. And the other update is that we hit 7,000 views on the filter video within 2 days. That's insane. And it really shows me the kind of videos that you guys want to see. You want to learn how to keep your fish better. And it shows me that you guys want to hear more about what I've learned as someone who's worked at these big box pet stores, the hacks, the behind the scenes, all that stuff. So that's where I'm going to leave it for now, guys. If you like this video, make sure you leave it a like. If you want to see more care guides, more hacks, more updates, make sure you subscribe, and I will see you guys next Sunday. Make sure you subscribe if you love. So keep tuned. Keep tuned.
I was gonna go with Busta.
Me? And you wonder why I film on my own.
Hurry up.
Come on. Come on.